Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness echo through decades in ways we never imagine. When 7-year-old Elsie found 3 abandoned German Shepherd puppies behind her family's crumbling barn, her world was falling apart, parents divorcing, money gone, and love feeling like a luxury her family couldn't afford. But she brought those scared, shivering pups home anyway. Her grandfather, an old war veteran who'd trained military dogs, saw something special in both the girl and her rescues. He taught Elsie everything about raising them right. 19 years passed. Elsie became a tough wilderness firefighter with Bear, the biggest of those 3 dogs, always at her side. When a massive wildfire traps her deep in the mountains with no way out, Bear makes a choice that will test everything her grandfather taught them both. But how far will loyalty carry a dog when the human who saved his life needs saving herself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn of 1985 painted Montana's rolling hills in shades of amber and rust. But 7-year-old Elsie McKenna saw only gray. Gray like the weathered boards of their failing farmhouse. Gray like her mother's tear-streaked cheeks. And gray like the uncertainty that had settled over there. Lives like dust after a drought. The old McKenna place had once been prosperous, 300 acres of prime, grazing land nestled in a valley where Willow Creek meandered. Through stands of cottonwood and pine, her great-grandfather had built the main house from local timber in 1923, and 4 generations had called it home. But the farm that had survived the Depression and 2 world wars was now slowly dying, one unpaid bill at a time. Elsie's father had left 3 weeks ago, taking his anger and his drinking problem with him. The silence he left behind was almost worse than the shouting had been. Her mother, Claire, moved through the house like a ghost, mechanically packing boxes and making phone calls to lawyers in town. The word divorce hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, acrid and inescapable. But there was one bright spot in this landscape of loss. Samuel McKenna, Elsie's grandfather, a man whose gentle strength seemed to anchor everything else in place. At 72, he still rose before dawn to tend the remaining livestock, his weathered hands steady despite arthritis that made cold mornings an ordeal. Samuel had served in the Pacific during World War II, training German Shepherds for the Canine Corps, and even now, decades later, he possessed an almost mystical understanding of canine behavior. The old man kept his bronze star in a wooden box on his dresser, earned during the brutal island campaigns, where his dogs had saved countless lives by detecting enemy positions and finding wounded soldiers. He rarely spoke of the war, but sometimes, when he worked with the farm's aging border collie, Elsie caught glimpses of the skilled trainer he'd once been. It was Samuel who found Elsie behind the barn that grey October afternoon, kneeling in the mud beside 3 tiny German Shepherd puppies. The pups couldn't have been more than 6 weeks old, their eyes bright with intelligence, but dulled by hunger and fear. Someone had abandoned them here, probably assuming they wouldn't survive the approaching winter. "Grandpa, look," Elsie whispered, her small hands cupping the largest pup, a male with distinctive black and tan markings and enormous paws that promised considerable size. They're all alone." Samuel knelt beside his granddaughter, his weathered face creasing with concern as he examined the puppies. 2 males and a female, all showing the classic German Shepherd features, pointed ears, noble heads, and that indefinable alertness that marked the breed. The largest male seemed to be protecting the other 2, positioning himself between them and any perceived threat. "They're in rough shape," Samuel said quietly, running gentle fingers over their small bodies, checking for injuries or illness. "Probably haven't eaten in days." The second male was smaller, with more tan in his coat and an almost fox-like intelligence in his bright eyes. He seemed more curious than afraid, already sniffing at Samuel's hands and showing the bold personality that would earn him the name Scout. The female was the smallest of the 3, with a regal bearing despite her circumstances. Even as a puppy, she carried herself with a dignity that would make Duchess the perfect name. Can we keep them? Elsie asked, though she already knew the answer would be complicated. Money was tight, tighter than it had ever been. The farm was struggling, her parents' marriage was ending, and 3 more mouths to feed seemed impossible. Samuel looked at his granddaughter's hopeful face, and then at the 3 vulnerable creatures shivering in the autumn chill. He thought of his own childhood, when acts of mercy had been as natural as breathing, before adult concerns about practicality and cost-benefit analysis clouded such simple compassion. "Your mother's got enough to worry about right now," he said carefully. "But let's get them warm and fed first. Then we'll see what we can work out." They fashioned makeshift collars from lengths of old rope, soft cotton clothesline that wouldn't chafe their necks. Samuel had Elsie help him create simple but effective collars, teaching her to measure carefully and tie secure knots. These 3 muddy pieces of rope would become the first symbol of Elsie's commitment to her new companions, the largest pup, whom Elsie immediately named Bear for his size and protective nature, took to the rope collar as if he'd been wearing one all his life. Scout seemed to consider his collar an interesting new toy, while Duchess accepted hers with the stoic grace of a queen receiving a crown. That evening, they set up a warm corner in the barn, using old blankets and a heat lamp to create a safe nursery. Samuel showed Elsie how to prepare puppy formula, explaining the importance of temperature and consistency. The 3 pups attacked their first real meal with desperate enthusiasm, their tiny tails wagging furiously. "They're going to be big dogs," Samuel observed, watching Bear's enthusiastic approach to his food. "German Shepherds need firm guidance and consistent training from day one. If you're serious about this, Elsie, it's going to be work. Real work every single day." "I can do it," Elsie said with the absolute certainty that only a 7-year-old can muster. "I'll take care of them." Samuel smiled, recognizing the same determination he'd seen in the best canine handlers he'd worked with during the war. "I believe you will, sweetheart. But they're going to take care of you too, in ways you can't imagine yet." Over the following days, Samuel began sharing the knowledge he'd accumulated over decades of working with dogs. He taught Elsie about the importance of establishing leadership without cruelty, about reading canine body language, and about the deep psychological bonds that could form between humans and dogs when built on mutual respect and trust. The puppies responded to this structured approach with remarkable speed. Bear, despite being the largest and potentially most dominant, showed an almost intuitive understanding of hierarchy, accepting Elsie's leadership while positioning himself as protector of his siblings. Scout lived up to his name by constantly exploring and investigating, his sharp mind always seeking new challenges. Duchess remained aloof but observant, watching and learning before committing to any course of action. Claire McKenna watched her daughter's transformation with mixed emotions. The puppies had given Elsie something to focus on besides the family's troubles, but they also represented another complication in an already difficult situation. 3 purebred German Shepherds would eventually require significant resources: food, veterinary care, training, and space. Resources the family simply didn't have. "Dad, we can't afford this," Claire said one evening as she and Samuel watched Elsie playing with the puppies in the yard. 3 big dogs, vet bills, food costs, it's just not practical. Samuel studied his daughter-in-law's face, reading the exhaustion and worry there. Claire had been carrying too much weight for too long, trying to hold the family together while her husband drank away their savings and their future. "Sometimes practical isn't everything," he said gently. "That little girl has been through more upheaval in the past month than most children face in years. These pups aren't just pets to her, they're stability. They're something that won't leave, won't disappoint her, won't break promises." Claire felt tears threatening again. Everything Samuel said was true, but truth didn't pay bills or put food on the table. "I know," she whispered. "But what happens when we lose the farm? What happens when we have to move to town? To some small apartment where we can barely afford rent, let alone 3 large dogs?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched Elsie teaching Bear to sit on command. The big pup was already showing remarkable intelligence and eagerness to please. "Then we'll figure it out when we get there," he said finally. "But for now, let's give her this. Let's give her something to love that won't disappear overnight." As November arrived with its first taste of winter, the three puppies grew rapidly. Bear was already showing signs of the massive size he'd eventually achieve, his paws enormous and his frame beginning to fill out. Scout remained sleeker and more agile, while Duchess developed into a beautiful example of German shepherd femininity, strong but elegant, intelligent but discerning. Samuel's bronze star sat in its wooden box, catching the late afternoon light that streamed through his bedroom window. Sometimes he took it out and held it, remembering the dogs he'd worked with in the Pacific. Rex, a massive shepherd who'd saved 12 wounded Marines on Iwo Jima. Lady, a smaller female whose nose had been so accurate she could detect enemy positions from a quarter-mile away. Sergeant, a dog whose loyalty had been so absolute he'd died defending Samuel from enemy fire. Those dogs had taught him that the bond between human and canine transcended simple training or obedience. At its best, it became a partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose and love that asked for nothing in return but the chance to serve. Now, watching his granddaughter work with 3 abandoned puppies, Samuel saw that same potential. Elsie had natural instincts for leadership and communication that couldn't be taught. The puppies responded to her not out of fear or submission, but out of genuine affection and respect. The first snow fell in early December, dusting the farm with a pristine white that made everything look clean and new. The puppies experienced snow for the first time, with typical German shepherd enthusiasm. Bear charging through drifts with abandon, Scout trying to catch individual snowflakes, and Duchess maintaining her dignity while still clearly enjoying the novel experience. Elsie bundled herself in her heaviest coat and boots, following her grandfather's instruction to maintain the dog's training routine regardless of weather. Samuel believed that consistency was the foundation of all successful relationships. Whether with dogs or humans, a dog needs to know what to expect from you, he explained as they worked with the now 4-month-old puppies in the snowy yard. "If you're reliable, if you keep your word, they'll move mountains for you. But if you're inconsistent, if you make promises you don't keep, they'll never fully trust you." The lesson applied to more than just dog training, and Elsie absorbed it all, the spoken instruction and the deeper wisdom beneath it. In a world where adults seem to break promises as easily as they made them, the straightforward honesty of dogs offered something precious, relationships based on mutual respect rather than convenience. As winter deepened and the family's financial situation grew more precarious, the 3 German shepherds became both blessing and burden. They provided companionship and purpose for Elsie, but they also represented mouths to feed when money was increasingly tight. Samuel quietly supplemented their care costs from his modest military pension, but he knew such help couldn't continue indefinitely. The puppies, now almost full-grown at 6 months, showed distinct personalities that would shape their adult lives. Bear had grown into a magnificent example of German shepherd power and intelligence, his black and tan coat thick and lustrous, his dark eyes alert and protective. He rarely left Elsie's side, seeming to understand that his primary purpose was her safety and happiness. Scout had developed into a leaner, more athletic dog with boundless curiosity and energy. He approached every situation as a puzzle to be solved, every challenge as an adventure to be embraced. His intelligence was sharp and quick, while Bear's was deeper and more thoughtful. Duchess had matured into genuine beauty, her coat a rich sable that caught the light like burnished gold. She remained somewhat aloof with strangers, but showed fierce loyalty to family. Her intelligence was selective. She understood everything, but chose to respond only when it suited her purposes. Samuel's training had given all 3 dogs a foundation of discipline and respect, but their individual personalities flourished within that structure. They were becoming not just well-trained animals, but true companions with distinct characters and capabilities. As winter gave way to spring, and Elsie's 8th birthday approached, the family faced difficult decisions. The farm would have to be sold. Claire had found work in town, but it meant moving to a small rental house with limited space and even more limited resources. The 3 German shepherds had grown from helpless puppies into magnificent young adults, each weighing more than 60 pounds and showing no signs of slowing their growth. Bear, in particular, promised to become truly massive, perhaps 120 pounds when fully mature. Samuel watched his granddaughter with her dogs and felt his heart breaking. The bond between them had grown into something special, something that transcended simple pet ownership. These weren't just Elsie's dogs, they were her partners, her confidants, her link to stability in an increasingly unstable world. But reality had its own demands, and change was coming whether they welcomed it or not. Time moved differently on the farm during those early years, each season blending into the next with the steady rhythm of growth and learning. By the time Elsie turned 16, the 3 German shepherds had become magnificent adults, each weighing well over 90 pounds and displaying the intelligence and loyalty that made their breed legendary. Bear had fulfilled his early promise, growing into a massive 115-pound giant whose presence commanded immediate respect. His black and tan coat had deepened into rich, lustrous colors, and his dark eyes held the steady intelligence of a dog who understood his responsibilities. He rarely left Elsie's side, positioning himself as her constant guardian and companion. Scout had matured into a leaner, more athletic build at 95 pounds, his lighter tan coat and bright eyes reflecting his adventurous spirit. He approached each day as a new opportunity for exploration and discovery, but never strayed far from the family unit that defined his world. Duchess, now a regal 90 pounds of elegant strength, had developed into a stunning example of German shepherd beauty. Her sable coat caught sunlight like spun gold, and she carried herself with the dignified bearing that had earned her name. Though more selective in her affections than her male companions, her loyalty to the McKenna family was absolute. Samuel McKenna, now approaching 80, moved more slowly than he once had, but his understanding of dogs remained as sharp as ever. His leather-bound training journal, filled with decades of observations about canine behavior and psychology, had become Elsie's most treasured possession. Every evening, grandfather and granddaughter would review the day's training sessions, discussing techniques and noting each dog's progress. That particular October morning dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect autumn light that made Montana's landscape look like something from a painting. Samuel had planned an advanced tracking exercise for the dogs, using a course that would challenge their scenting abilities and problem-solving skills. "Today, we're going to test their independence," Samuel explained to Elsie as they prepared the training materials. "A good working dog needs to make decisions without constant human guidance. They need to trust their instincts and their training." Elsie nodded, checking the long leads and marking flags they'd use for the exercise. At 16, she had absorbed years of her grandfather's wisdom about dog training, but she never tired of learning new techniques. The 3 German shepherds waited patiently nearby, their attention focused on the humans who would soon give them direction and purpose. Samuel had laid out a complex scent trail the previous evening, using clothing items and food rewards hidden at various points around the property. The dogs would work individually, allowing each to demonstrate their unique approaches to problem-solving. Bear went first, his massive frame moving with surprising grace as he followed the scent trail. His method was methodical and thorough, never rushing but never wasting motion. He approached each decision point with careful analysis, his nose working constantly to gather information. Scout's turn revealed his more impulsive nature, faster and more energetic, but still accurate and focused. He seemed to view the exercise as an exciting game rather than serious work, his tail wagging throughout the entire course. Duchess approached the challenge with her typical dignity, moving at her own pace and refusing to be hurried. Her accuracy was exceptional, and she showed particular skill at the most difficult scent discriminations. "They're really coming along," Samuel said with satisfaction, as Duchess completed the final portion of the course. "Each one has developed their own style, but they all have the foundation skills they'll need for—" The words died in his throat. Samuel's weathered hand flew to his chest, his face suddenly grey with pain. The leather training journal fell from his other hand as he staggered backward, gasping for breath. "Grandpa!" Elsie rushed to his side, catching him as his legs buckled. The 3 German shepherds immediately sensed the emergency, their playful demeanor vanishing as they moved into protective positions around the fallen man. Bear pressed close to Samuel's side, his massive body providing support while his intelligent eyes searched for the source of threat. Scout began pacing in agitated circles, whining softly as he tried to understand what was wrong. Duchess positioned herself between Samuel and the outside world, alert for any danger that might be approaching. Call your mother," Samuel managed to whisper, his breathing labored and irregular. "Phone? In the kitchen." Elsie's hands shook as she dialed, her mind racing even as she tried to stay calm. The dogs remained at full alert, sensing their beloved trainer's distress and responding with the protective instincts he'd helped shape over years of careful guidance. The ambulance arrived 23 minutes later, but Samuel was already gone. The massive heart attack had taken him quickly, peacefully, with the 3 dogs he'd trained and the granddaughter he'd loved surrounding him with their presence. Dr. Mitchell, the family physician, explained that Samuel's heart had simply worn out. 8 decades of life, wartime stress, and the physical demands of farm work had finally taken their toll. There had been no warning signs, no opportunity for goodbyes or final words of wisdom. Bear, Scout, and Duchess seemed to understand the finality of what had happened. They remained close to Samuel's still form until the paramedics arrived, then reluctantly moved aside as the humans took over. Their confusion was evident. The pack leader who had given structure and purpose to their lives was suddenly, inexplicably gone. Elsie knelt beside her grandfather's training journal, its leather cover worn smooth by years of handling. The pages contained detailed observations about each dog's personality, training progress, and potential future roles. Samuel's careful handwriting documented breakthrough moments, setbacks, and the gradual development of 3 remarkable animals. The last entry, written just 2 days earlier, read, "Bear shows exceptional protective instincts with natural guardian temperament combined with high intelligence makes him ideal companion for her future challenges. Trust the bond. It will sustain them both when I cannot." Claire arrived within the hour, her face streaked with tears as she surveyed the scene. The farm that had been Samuel's life work, the dogs he'd trained with such care, the granddaughter he'd shaped with patient wisdom, all of it now fell to her to manage during the most difficult period of their lives. "Mom, what happens now?" Elsie asked, her voice small and lost. The 3 German shepherds pressed close to her, offering the comfort they'd been trained to provide. Claire looked at her daughter, at the 3 magnificent dogs, and at the farm that was already slipping away from them, financially. Samuel's death created immediate practical problems that had no easy solutions. His military pension died with him. His knowledge and experience couldn't be replaced. The dogs he'd spent years training needed continued guidance and care that required resources the family simply didn't have. "We'll figure it out," Claire said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Somehow we'll figure it out." But even as she spoke the words, both mother and daughter knew that major changes were inevitable. The farm was already in financial trouble. Samuel's death would only accelerate the process of losing their home. The 3 German shepherds represented both emotional anchors and practical burdens. In town, in a small rental house, keeping 3 large dogs would be difficult, if not impossible. Bear seemed to sense the uncertainty surrounding his pack. He moved closer to Elsie, his massive head resting against her shoulder as she sat beside her grandfather's journal. Scout and Duchess flanked them, creating a protective circle that excluded the adult world's complications and fears. Samuel's bronze star caught the afternoon light from its place on the kitchen windowsill, a reminder of duty, sacrifice, and the bonds forged between species in times of crisis. The old soldier had trained dogs to save lives during wartime, and now his final trainees faced their own battle, not against enemy forces, but against the simple, crushing realities of loss and change. The leather journal lay open to Samuel's final entry, his words about trusting the bond seeming both prophetic and heartbreaking. The 3 dogs he'd shaped with such care now faced an uncertain future, their steady world suddenly as fragile as autumn leaves in a Montana wind. Change was coming, whether the McKenna family was ready or not. And with Samuel gone, the decisions about Bear, Scout, and Duchess would fall to those who loved them but lacked his deep understanding of what these magnificent animals were truly capable of becoming. The days following Samuel's funeral passed in a haze of legal paperwork, financial assessments, and impossible decisions. The McKenna farm, already struggling before his death, now faced immediate foreclosure. Claire's job at the county clerk's office in town paid enough to support a small household, but not enough to maintain the farm and care for 3 large dogs. Elsie spent those October evenings in the barn with Bear, Scout, and Duchess, reading through her grandfather's training journal by lamplight. Each page revealed new insights into the dogs' personalities and potential, but also reminded her of how much knowledge had died with Samuel. His careful observations about Bear's protective instincts, Scout's problem-solving abilities, and Duchess's intuitive intelligence painted a picture of 3 exceptional animals whose full capabilities were only beginning to emerge. Bear's first collar, the professional training collar, Samuel had given him during his adolescence, hung on a peg beside the barn door. Unlike the makeshift rope collars of puppyhood, this collar represented the transition from pet to working partner. Its worn leather and metal studs told the story of countless training sessions, of a relationship built on mutual respect and clear communication. "I don't know what to do with you guys," Elsie whispered, running her fingers through Bear's thick coat. The massive dog pressed closer, his dark eyes reflecting understanding that went beyond simple canine intelligence. He seemed to sense the upheaval approaching their small world, the changes that would test everything Samuel had taught them. Scout paced restlessly around the barn, his energy contained but clearly frustrated by the lack of structured activity. For years, Samuel had provided daily challenges and training exercises that engaged the dog's sharp mind. Without that mental stimulation, Scout's natural intelligence was turning inward, creating anxiety and restlessness. Duchess remained closer to her usual composed self, but Elsie noticed subtle changes in the female's behavior. She had taken to positioning herself at vantage points where she could observe the entire property, as if assuming security responsibilities that had once been shared among the pack's human members. Dr. Hansen, the local veterinarian, had offered a solution that seemed both generous and heartbreaking. His small practice included boarding facilities and a working farm, where he kept several rescued animals. He could provide temporary homes for Scout and Duchess, ensuring they received proper care while the McKenna family navigated their transition. They'd be well cared for, Dr. Hansen had assured Claire and Elsie during his visit the previous week. "I could use Scout's intelligence for some of the search and rescue training I do with the county. And Duchess has the temperament for therapy work. She could help children who've experienced trauma." The offer made practical sense, but it felt like another loss piled onto the mountain of grief Elsie was already carrying. These weren't just dogs to be redistributed like farm equipment. They were family members, companions who had shared her daily life for 9 years. Bear, somehow, seemed to understand that he would remain with Elsie. His position as her primary protector had been established early and reinforced through years of training. Where she went, he would follow. But the big dog also understood pack dynamics, and he showed increasing distress as he sensed the approaching separation from his littermates. Claire watched her daughter's internal struggle with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. At 42, she was facing the prospect of single parenthood, financial instability, and the responsibility of maintaining some stability for Elsie during these crucial teenage years. 3 large dogs represented expenses and complications she simply couldn't manage. "Honey, we have to be realistic," Claire said gently one evening as they sat in the farm's kitchen. Papers spread across the table documenting debts, assets, and diminishing options. "Dr. Hansen's offer is generous. Scout and Duchess would have good homes, and you could visit them regularly." Elsie looked up from Samuel's journal, her eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. "Grandpa spent years training them to work together. He always said they were stronger as a pack than as individuals." "I know what he said. But your grandfather also understood that sometimes circumstances force difficult choices." Claire's voice carried the weight of her own difficult decisions. The divorce, the job in town, the necessity of leaving the only home her family had known for generations. Bear lifted his massive head from where he'd been resting beside Elsie's chair. His intelligent eyes moved between the two humans, reading the emotional tension that filled the room. Scout, ever curious, approached the table as if drawn by the intensity of the conversation. Duchess remained in her chosen position by the window, alert but maintaining her typical dignified distance. That night, Elsie made her first independent training decision since Samuel's death. She took all 3 dogs to the back pasture, where her grandfather had conducted his most advanced exercises. Using techniques from his journal, she set up a complex problem-solving course that would challenge each dog's unique abilities. "Okay, guys," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Let's see if we can do this without Grandpa." Bear approached the first obstacle, a series of scent discriminations that required identifying specific objects among distractors with his usual methodical precision. But Elsie could see uncertainty in his movements, a hesitation that hadn't been there when Samuel provided guidance. She consulted the journal, finding her grandfather's notes about Bear's learning style and motivational preferences. "He responds best to quiet encouragement rather than enthusiastic praise," Samuel had written. "Confidence builds gradually through consistent success." Following this guidance, Elsie modulated her voice and approach, offering steady support rather than excited cheerleading. Bear's performance improved immediately, his confidence returning as he recognized the familiar training pattern. Scout's turn revealed his need for mental challenge. Without complex problems to solve, his intelligence was turning destructive. Elsie designed a multi-step puzzle that required him to open latches, navigate barriers, and make decisions based on changing criteria. The bright dog attacked the challenge with enthusiasm, his tail wagging as he worked through each component. Duchess approached her exercises with typical selectivity, performing flawlessly when the tasks interested her, but showing subtle resistance to activities she deemed pointless. Samuel's notes revealed the key. Duchess responds to purpose-driven training. She needs to understand why each skill matters. Elsie began explaining the reasoning behind each exercise, talking to Duchess as she would to an intelligent partner rather than a simple pet. The female's performance transformed, her movements becoming more engaged and precise as she understood the logic behind each request. The training session lasted 3 hours, and by its conclusion, all 3 dogs showed the satisfied exhaustion that came from meaningful mental work. More importantly, Elsie had demonstrated to herself and to them that Samuel's knowledge lived on in his journal and in the foundation he'd built. Walking back to the farmhouse under a canopy of autumn stars, Elsie felt a mixture of pride and determination. The approaching separation from Scout and Duchess remained heartbreaking, but she now understood that her grandfather's training had prepared her for exactly this kind of challenge. The dog's response to her independent leadership proved that the bond Samuel had helped forge was strong enough to survive his absence. Bear pressed against her side, his massive presence reassuring and steady. Scout bounded ahead, then circled back, his energy channeled into purposeful movement rather than anxious pacing. Even Duchess showed subtle signs of approval, her tail carried higher than usual as she padded alongside her human pack leader. Tomorrow would bring difficult goodbyes and painful changes. But tonight, under Montana's vast sky, the pack remained whole, and in that wholeness, Elsie found the strength to face whatever came next. The morning came too soon, arriving with the kind of crystalline November light that made even heartbreak beautiful. Dr. Hansen's truck pulled into the McKenna driveway at exactly 9 o'clock, its extended cab modified to safely transport large dogs. The veterinarian stepped out with the gentle efficiency of someone accustomed to difficult transitions. Scout's favorite stick lay, abandoned near the porch steps, a worn piece of oak he'd carried proudly for 3 years, claiming it from the woodpile during one of Samuel's training sessions. The stick had become Scout's treasured possession, a symbol of play and simpler times when his biggest concern was whether he'd be chosen for the next tracking exercise. Bear seemed to understand what was happening before any human gave explicit signals. He positioned himself between Scout and Duchess and the approaching truck, his massive body radiating tension. His dark eyes moved constantly between the stranger's activities and Elsie's face, reading her emotional state and preparing to respond to whatever she might need. "These are exceptional animals," Dr. Hansen said quietly to Claire as he examined the temporary transport crates. "I want you to know they'll receive the best possible care, and Elsie can visit whenever she wants. My farm is only 40 minutes from town." Claire nodded, her throat too tight for easy speech. The financial relief Dr. Hansen's generosity provided was undeniable, but watching her daughter's pain made every practical benefit feel like betrayal. Elsie knelt beside Scout first, the energetic male who approached every situation with curiosity and optimism. His bright eyes searched her face, looking for clues about this unusual disruption to their routine. She buried her fingers in his tan coat, memorizing the texture and warmth that had comforted her through countless difficult nights. "You're going to help Dr. Hansen with his work," she whispered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You're going to use that smart brain of yours to find people who are lost, just like Grandpa always said you would." Scout pressed closer, his tail wagging uncertainly as he sensed the farewell in her tone. He'd never been separated from his littermates for more than a few hours, and the concept of permanent departure was beyond his understanding. Duchess approached the goodbye with her typical dignity, but Elsie could see confusion in the female's intelligent eyes. Duchess had always been the most intuitive of the three, often anticipating human needs before they were expressed. Now that intuition was telling her something was wrong, something that violated the pack structure Samuel had so carefully established. "You're going to help children," Elsie told her, stroking the beautiful sable coat that had grown richer and more lustrous with each passing year. "Kids who are scared and hurt, just like I was when Dad left. You'll show them what loyalty looks like." Duchess leaned into the contact, her reserved nature allowing this rare display of open affection. She seemed to understand that this moment required something beyond her usual composed demeanor. The loading process was efficient but emotionally devastating. Scout entered his transport crate with typical curiosity, treating it as another puzzle to explore. Duchess required more coaxing, her intelligence recognizing that this particular crate meant separation and change. Bear's distress escalated as he watched his siblings disappear into the truck. The massive dog began pacing in tight circles, whining softly, a sound Elsie had never heard from him before. His usual stoic demeanor cracked, revealing the emotional depth Samuel had always insisted existed beneath his professional training. Dr. Hansen's truck disappeared down the gravel driveway, taking with it 9 years of shared history and companionship. Bear stood rigid beside Elsie, his entire body trembling with suppressed emotion. For the first time since puppyhood, he was alone, no littermates to provide the complex social dynamics that had shaped his development. The move to town happened 3 weeks later. Claire had found a small rental house on Pine Street, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a postage stamp yard that barely accommodated Bear's massive frame. The transition from 300 acres of Montana rangeland to urban confinement was jarring for both Elsie and her canine companion, bears. Anxiety manifested in overprotective behavior that bordered on problematic. He positioned himself between Elsie and every perceived threat: delivery drivers, neighborhood children, even other students walking to school. The confident, well-socialized dog Samuel had trained began showing signs of stress that worried Claire and frustrated Elsie. "He's not adjusting well," Claire observed after their third week in town. Bear had just completed another aggressive display toward a jogger who'd passed too close to their front yard. "Maybe we should talk to Dr. Hansen about training options." Elsie consulted Samuel's journal, searching for insights about separation anxiety and environmental changes. Her grandfather's notes revealed his understanding of German Shepherd psychology. These dogs bond deeply and permanently. Disruption of pack structure creates stress that must be addressed through increased structure and purpose, not punishment. She began implementing a rigorous training schedule designed to channel Bear's protective instincts into appropriate behaviors. Every morning before school, they practiced obedience exercises in the small backyard. Every evening, they walked through town, gradually desensitizing Bear to urban stimuli while maintaining his alert responsiveness. The work was exhausting, especially combined with schoolwork and the emotional weight of recent losses. Elsie's grades began suffering as she devoted more time to Bear's rehabilitation. Her few friends couldn't understand her dedication to just a dog, and social invitations became increasingly rare. But slowly, progress emerged. Bear's overprotectiveness evolved into appropriate alertness. His anxiety attacks became less frequent and less severe. Most importantly, the deep bond between human and dog remained intact despite the environmental upheaval. Weekend visits to Dr. Hansen's farm became the highlight of both Elsie's and Bear's weeks. Scout had adapted to his new role with typical enthusiasm, showing remarkable aptitude for search and rescue training. His intelligence and energy made him an ideal candidate for specialized work, and Dr. Hansen had already begun discussions with county emergency services about formal certification. Duchess had found her calling in therapy work, her intuitive nature and calm demeanor providing comfort to traumatized children. Her reserved personality, which had sometimes seemed aloof, proved perfect for work with youngsters who needed gentle, non-threatening companionship. The reunions were joyful, but bittersweet. The three dogs clearly remembered their bond, greeting each other with enthusiasm that bordered on hysteria. But they had also begun developing independent identities shaped by their new roles and environments. Bear's reaction to these visits revealed the depth of his continuing attachment to his littermates. For days afterward, he would search the house and yard, looking for Scout and Duchess. His disappointment was palpable, a reminder that the separation had cost him something fundamental to his nature. Claire watched her daughter navigate these challenges with a mixture of pride and concern. At 16, Elsie displayed maturity and dedication that exceeded many adults, but she was also isolating herself from normal teenage experiences. Her relationship with Bear had become her primary source of emotional support, perhaps to an unhealthy degree. "You know it's okay to have friends your own age, too," Claire suggested gently one evening, as Elsie worked with Bear on advanced obedience drills. Elsie looked up from the training session, her expression serious beyond her years. "He needs me right now, and I need him. We'll figure out the rest later." Bear pressed closer to her side, his massive head resting against her shoulder in a gesture that had become their signature comfort position. In the fading light of another Montana winter, they looked less like human and pet than like partners facing the world together, changed by loss but strengthened by their unbreakable bond. 2 years passed with the steady rhythm of healing and growth. Elsie's high school graduation approached like a distant thunderstorm, visible on the horizon but not yet urgent enough to demand immediate preparation. At 18, she had grown into a young woman whose quiet strength and self-reliance set her apart from her classmates. Bear had reached his full magnificent size, weighing 120 pounds of muscle and bone, wrapped in a lustrous black and tan coat. His presence was commanding enough to stop conversations when he walked down Pine Street beside Elsie. But his gentle demeanor with children and the elderly had earned him acceptance in their small community. The high school diploma that would soon hang on Claire's kitchen wall represented more than academic achievement. For Elsie, it symbolized survival, proof that she could navigate the conventional world while maintaining the deeper values Samuel had instilled. Her grades weren't spectacular, but they were solid, earned through disciplined effort rather than natural brilliance. More importantly, the diploma represented a crossroads. College applications sat untouched on her desk, scholarship opportunities ignored in favor of research into wilderness firefighting programs. While her classmates planned sororities and liberal arts educations, Elsie studied the requirements for forest service careers and emergency response training. "You could go anywhere," Claire said one evening, reviewing the college brochures that continued arriving despite Elsie's lack of interest. "Your SAT scores are strong enough for the state university, and there are programs that would give you a full ride." Elsie looked up from where she sat on the floor, brushing Bear's thick coat, a nightly ritual that provided meditation for both human and dog. "I don't want to go anywhere, Mom. I want to do something that matters." Claire felt the familiar mixture of pride and frustration that her daughter's independence always triggered. At 18, Elsie displayed judgment and maturity that many adults lacked, but she also showed a stubborn streak that made guidance difficult. "College would prepare you for something that matters," Claire insisted. "You could study environmental science, veterinary medicine, even psychology if you want to work with animals professionally." Bear raised his massive head, sensing tension in the conversation. His dark eyes moved between the two humans, reading emotional currents with the sensitivity Samuel had trained into him. Elsie's hand continued stroking his coat, the repetitive motion calming both of them. "Grandpa never went to college," Elsie said quietly, "but he understood more about psychology and leadership than most professors. He learned by doing, by failing, by paying attention to what worked and what didn't." The truth in her statement was undeniable, but it also worried Claire. Samuel had lived in a different era when practical experience could substitute for formal education. The modern world demanded credentials, certifications, and documented expertise. Elsie's research into firefighting careers had revealed the physical and mental demands of wilderness work. The training academies were rigorous, weeding out candidates who lacked the strength, endurance, and psychological resilience required for dangerous emergency work. But the career appealed to something deep in her nature, the desire to face genuine challenges, to make life-or-death decisions that mattered. Bear had become her unwitting training partner, accompanying her on increasingly demanding runs through the hills surrounding town. His powerful stride and unlimited endurance pushed her to levels of fitness she'd never imagined possible. More importantly, his presence provided security during early morning or late evening training sessions in remote areas. The physical preparation was only part of Elsie's development. She had continued studying Samuel's training journal, applying his insights about leadership and communication to her own growth. The skills he'd taught for managing dogs translated surprisingly well to managing herself. The importance of consistency, clear goals, and honest self-assessment. Her social isolation had become less painful as she focused on purposeful activities. While other teenagers worried about prom dates and social media drama, Elsie found satisfaction in measurable progress toward concrete goals. Bear's companionship filled most of her emotional needs, providing loyalty and understanding without the complexity of human relationships. The one romantic relationship she'd attempted during senior year had ended predictably. Jake Morrison, a football player with college prospects and conventional ambitions, had initially been intrigued by Elsie's unique combination of strength and gentleness. But Bear's presence had made normal dating impossible. The massive German shepherd didn't actively threaten Jake, but his protective assessment was constant and unnerving. Every gesture, every movement toward Elsie was evaluated by 120 pounds of trained guardian instinct. Jake's teenage ego couldn't tolerate the implicit competition for Elsie's attention and loyalty. "It's like you're married to that dog," Jake had complained during their breakup conversation. "There's no room for anyone else in your life." The criticism stung because it contained uncomfortable truth. Elsie's relationship with Bear had become primary in ways that exceeded normal pet ownership. They communicated through subtle cues, anticipated each other's needs, and faced challenges as a unified team. Claire worried that her daughter was using Bear as an excuse to avoid the vulnerability that human relationships required. The bond between them was beautiful but potentially limiting, creating a comfortable isolation that might prevent normal social development. But watching Elsie with Bear also revealed qualities that gave Claire hope. Her daughter showed patience, empathy, and nurturing instincts that would serve her well in any relationship, human or otherwise. The discipline and consistency required to maintain Bear's training had developed character, traits that many adults struggled to achieve. The spring before, graduation brought acceptance letters from firefighting academies in 3 states. Elsie had applied quietly, researching programs that would allow Bear to accompany her through training and into professional service. The possibility of working canine units in wilderness areas offered a career path that could accommodate her unique partnership. The Montana Wildfire Academy accepts service animals. Elsie announced one evening, holding the acceptance letter that would determine her future. Bear could live on campus during training, and graduates get placement preference with forest service units that use working dogs. Claire read the letter carefully, noting the physical demands, psychological requirements, and statistical warnings about injury and mortality rates. Firefighting was dangerous work, especially in remote wilderness areas where rescue might be hours or days away. "Are you sure this is what you want?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer from the excitement in her daughter's eyes. Elsie looked at Bear, who had moved to his protective position beside her chair. His steady presence radiated the confidence and loyalty that had sustained her through 2 years of major life changes. "I want work that matters," she said simply. "I want to help people, to make a difference when things go wrong. And I want to do it with Bear." The decision felt inevitable, like the natural culmination of everything Samuel had taught about service, duty, and the bonds between species. Elsie's high school diploma would soon join the family's collection of achievements. But it represented a beginning rather than an ending. The first step toward a life of purpose and partnership that would honor her grandfather's memory. The Montana Wildfire Academy occupied a sprawling complex in the foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains, where future firefighters learned their craft, surrounded by the same forests they'd eventually protect. Elsie's firefighter helmet, bright yellow with reflective stripes, and her name stenciled in black letters, represented her transition from civilian to professional, from preparation to purpose. At 19, she was among the youngest candidates in the intensive 16-week program. But her physical conditioning and mental preparation quickly set her apart from the other recruits. Years of training with Bear had developed endurance and strength that impressed even veteran instructors. While Samuel's lessons in leadership and decision-making provided psychological tools her peers lacked, Bear's separation from Elsie during the initial training period proved more difficult than either had anticipated. Academy regulations required candidates to focus exclusively on curriculum during the first 8 weeks, with personal animals housed in campus facilities but restricted from training activities. The massive German shepherd spent his days in a comfortable kennel run, receiving excellent care from academy staff, but lacking the mental stimulation and purposeful activity that had defined his life. Claire visited twice weekly, reporting that Bear appeared healthy, but increasingly despondent. "He's not eating well," she told Elsie during one of their brief weekend phone calls. The staff says he's not aggressive or uncooperative, but he's clearly depressed. He spends most of his time lying by the kennel gate, watching for you. Elsie felt the separation anxiety as acutely as Bear did. Her performance in academy classes remained strong, top 10% in physical fitness, excellent marks in fire behavior and suppression, tactics. But she struggled with the psychological isolation of being separated from her primary companion and emotional anchor. Her fellow candidates couldn't understand the depth of her concern for just a dog. They were focused on mastering chainsaw operation, understanding weather patterns, and developing the tactical skills necessary for wildland firefighting. Elsie's preoccupation with Bear struck many of them as unprofessional distraction. You need to get your priorities straight. McKenna, advised Rick Torres, a former Marine whose military experience made him a natural leader among the candidates. Out there on a fire, you can't be worried about your pet. People's lives depend on your complete focus. The criticism stung because it echoed Elsie's own fears. Was her bond with Bear a strength that enhanced her capabilities, or a weakness that would compromise her effectiveness? Samuel's journal provided guidance, but it had been written for different circumstances, different challenges. Weekend visits to the campus kennel became the emotional highlights of Elsie's training experience. Bear's joy at seeing her was overwhelming. 120 pounds of muscle and energy, expressing 9 months of accumulated affection in minutes of frantic reunion. But the goodbyes were devastating, leaving both human and dog drained and anxious. Academy instructors watched these reunions with professional interest. Dogs were common in firefighting. Many crews used them for detection work, search and rescue, and even psychological support during extended campaigns. But the intensity of Elsie and Bear's bond was unusual, suggesting potential beyond normal working relationships. That's not a typical handler-dog dynamic, observed Captain Sarah Walsh, a 20-year veteran who taught advanced wilderness survival. There's communication happening there that goes way beyond basic training. Captain Walsh had worked with numerous canine teams throughout her career, and she recognized the signs of exceptional partnership. Bear's attention to Elsie wasn't just obedience, it was genuine concern and emotional investment. Similarly, Elsie's awareness of Bear's physical and psychological state exceeded normal pet ownership, approaching the intuitive connection that characterized the best working teams. Midway through the program, academy policies shifted to allow advanced candidates to begin integration training with personal working animals. Elsie's academic performance and physical capabilities had earned her placement in this specialized track, designed for graduates seeking careers in remote wilderness, areas where human-animal partnerships provided tactical advantages. Bear's first day back in training revealed how much both he and Elsie had suffered during their separation. The big dog's enthusiasm was overwhelming, but his skills remained sharp. Samuel's foundation training had created abilities that survived months of disuse. More importantly, Bear had developed new capabilities during his enforced isolation. His natural protective instincts had evolved into something approaching professional assessment. He evaluated every person and situation through the lens of potential threat to Elsie, but without the reactive aggression that would make him unsuitable for emergency work. The integration exercises pushed both partners beyond their previous experience. Wilderness navigation with limited visibility, extended searches through difficult terrain, and emergency rescue scenarios that required split-second coordination between human and canine skills. Bear excelled at tasks that challenged other working dogs. His size and strength allowed him to carry supplies and equipment that would burden smaller animals, while his intelligence enabled complex problem-solving that went beyond simple obedience responses. One particular exercise involved locating and extracting a victim from a simulated wildfire scenario, an instructor hidden in dense forest, while smoke machines created realistic visibility challenges. Most human dog teams required multiple attempts to complete the task successfully. Bear found the hidden instructor in 12 minutes, guided Elsie through the optimal extraction route, and positioned himself to assist with the rescue carry, all without explicit commands or guidance. His performance demonstrated the kind of intuitive partnership that couldn't be taught, only developed through years of mutual trust and shared experience. Academy staff began discussing Elsie and Bear as candidates for specialized canine units that worked the most challenging wilderness assignments. These positions required both human and animal to function independently for extended periods, making decisions without supervision or support. Graduation approached with a mixture of celebration and apprehension. Elsie's academic performance had earned recognition as a distinguished graduate, while Bear's demonstration scores qualified him for advanced working dog certification. Together, they represented exactly the kind of partnership that modern wildfire services needed. But success also meant deployment to remote stations where their skills would be tested by genuine emergencies. The controlled environment of academy training would give way to actual fires, real rescues, and life or death decisions that carried consequences beyond academic evaluation. Claire attended the graduation ceremony with mixed emotions. Her daughter had achieved remarkable success, transforming herself into a highly trained professional while maintaining the values and relationships that defined her character. But the career path Elsie had chosen carried risks that kept Claire awake at night. The graduation ceremony concluded with individual recognition for distinguished performance. When Elsie's name was called, Bear stood beside her, his massive frame radiating the quiet confidence Samuel had trained into him years earlier, the firefighter's helmet she'd carried through 16 weeks of training now represented more than personal achievement. It symbolized her commitment to service, her partnership with Bear, and her readiness to face whatever challenges awaited them in Montana's vast wilderness. Their first assignment, a remote station in the Glacier National Park area, promised to test everything. They'd learned about leadership, partnership, and survival. But as Elsie looked at Bear's steady, intelligent eyes, she felt the same confidence Samuel had always encouraged. Trust the bond, and it will sustain them both. 5 years of wilderness firefighting had transformed both Elsie and Bear into seasoned professionals. At 24, Elsie carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced genuine danger and emerged stronger. Bear, now 9 years old, had reached the prime of his working life, his massive frame still powerful but tempered with the wisdom that came from experience. The emergency radio crackled to life at 3:47 a.m., jerking Elsie from deep sleep in her cabin at the remote Whitefish Range station. Bear lifted his great head from his position beside her bed, instantly alert, despite having been sound asleep moments earlier. After 5 years as partners, they responded to emergencies with choreographed efficiency. Structure fire, 2300 block of Old Mill Road. The dispatcher's voice cut through static. Residential, possible entrapment. Local volunteer department requesting forestry backup. Elsie was already pulling on her gear, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar routine. Bear moved to his equipment position, waiting for the work harness that would transform him from companion to working partner. The address seemed familiar, but in the pre-dawn darkness and rush of preparation, she couldn't place it immediately. The drive to the scene took 43 minutes through winding mountain roads, Bear riding in his custom-designed compartment that allowed him to monitor their surroundings while remaining secure during emergency response. They'd made this journey hundreds of times, responding to fires, medical emergencies, and search and rescue calls throughout their assigned territory. But as they crested the final hill and the scene came into view, Elsie felt her professional composure crack. The burning structure wasn't just another emergency call, it was Dr. Hansen's veterinary clinic and farm. The place where Scout and Duchess had lived for the past 7 years, flames engulfed the main clinic building while volunteer firefighters battled to save the adjacent barn where Dr. Hansen kept his rescued animals. The scene was chaos. Emergency vehicles with flashing lights, personnel running between structures, and the acrid smell of burning timber mixed with something more disturbing. Bear's reaction was immediate and unprecedented. The big dog began whining, pawing at his compartment door with an urgency Elsie had never witnessed. His nose worked constantly, processing scents that carried information she couldn't access. Fire Chief Williams briefed her quickly as she and Bear approached the command post. "Doc Hansen made it out okay, but we lost most of the clinic. He's been trying to account for all his animals, says he's missing at least 2 dogs from the barn area." The words hit Elsie like physical blows. 2 missing dogs. She knew without being told which animals Dr. Hansen couldn't find. "Scout and Duchess," she whispered. The names catching in her throat, Bear's agitation increased, his powerful body trembling with suppressed energy. He knew these scents, recognized the familiar smells of his littermates beneath the overwhelming odor of smoke and destruction. Dr. Hansen appeared out of the smoke, his face streaked with soot and tears. At 71, the veterinarian moved with the careful precision of someone fighting exhaustion and shock. When he saw Elsie and Bear, his composure finally broke. "They were in the barn when it started," he said, his voice cracking. "I got most of the animals out, but Scout and Duchess, the fire moved so fast and they were in the back runs. I couldn't reach them." Elsie felt the world tilt sideways. Scout and Duchess, her grandfather's dogs, her childhood companions, trapped in a burning building while she slept 40 miles away. The guilt was immediate and crushing. She should have been here, should have sensed their need somehow. Bear pressed against her legs, offering comfort while simultaneously communicating his own distress. His littermates were somewhere in this chaos, and every instinct demanded action. "Are you certain they didn't escape?" Elsie asked, though she already knew the answer from Dr. Hansen's expression. "Scout. We found Scout behind the barn," Dr. Hansen said quietly. "Looks like he was overcome by smoke, trying to get back to Duchess. He didn't suffer." The news struck Elsie like a physical blow, buckling her knees and forcing her to grip Bear's harness for support. Scout, the curious, intelligent dog who had approached every challenge as an adventure, was gone. The puppy who had carried his favorite stick with such pride, who had solved problems with boundless enthusiasm, would never bound ahead on another trail. Bear's whining intensified, a sound of pure anguish that cut through the chaos around them. He understood death, had encountered it during rescue operations, but this was different. This was family. "And Duchess?" Elsie managed to ask. Dr. Hansen's expression grew even more pained. "Missing. The back section of the barn collapsed before we could search it thoroughly. She could be—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Bear suddenly pulled away from Elsie, his nose working frantically as he caught a scent that separated itself from the general confusion. His behavior shifted from grief to intense focus, the transformation so dramatic that experienced firefighters turned to watch. "He's tracking something," Chief Williams observed. "Maybe we should let him work," Elsie nodded, her professional training overriding personal devastation. Bear had found lost hikers, located accident victims, and detected dangerous situations that human senses missed. If Duchess was alive, he represented their best chance of finding her. The search led them away from the main fire scene, into the dense forest that bordered Dr. Hansen's property. Bear moved with purposeful determination, following a scent trail that led deeper into wilderness areas where a frightened dog might seek refuge. Duchess always was the smartest of the 3, Dr. Hansen said, as they followed Bear's lead through increasingly difficult terrain. If she escaped the fire, she'd run as far as possible from the danger. The search continued for hours, Bear leading them through creek beds and over rocky ridges that would challenge human trackers. His stamina seemed limitless, driven by determination that transcended normal working dog behavior. As dawn broke over the mountains, Bear's pace suddenly quickened. He'd found something, not just scent, but active trail. His body language changed from methodical tracking to excited pursuit, his tail wagging for the first time since they'd arrived at the fire scene. The trail led to a small cave formed by fallen boulders, barely large enough to shelter a medium-sized dog. Bear approached the entrance with careful precision, whining softly in the particular tone he used for communication rather than distress. A faint, answering whine emerged from the cave's depths. "Duchess," Elsie breathed. Dropping to her knees beside the cave entrance, what emerged was barely recognizable as the regal German shepherd who had once carried herself with such dignity. Duchess was wild-eyed with terror, her beautiful sable coat matted with soot and burrs. She moved with the furtive desperation of an animal that had been pushed beyond its capacity to cope. Bear approached his sister with infinite gentleness, communicating in ways that transcended human understanding. His presence seemed to provide the first sense of safety Duchess had felt since escaping the fire. But when Elsie reached toward her, Duchess recoiled with a fear that bordered on violence. The psychological trauma of losing Scout, escaping the fire, and spending hours alone in the wilderness had damaged something fundamental in the dog's psyche. "She doesn't recognize human help," Dr. Hansen observed sadly. "Sometimes trauma does that, makes them revert to purely wild behavior." The rescue required patience and skill that drew on everything Samuel had taught about canine psychology. Bear served as intermediary, communicating with Duchess in ways that gradually reduced her terror to manageable wariness. Eventually, working together, they were able to coax Duchess from the cave and begin the journey back to safety. But the dog who emerged was fundamentally changed, traumatized, defensive, and suspicious of the human world that had failed to protect her from loss and terror. The drive back to Dr. Hansen's property was silent, except for Duchess's occasional whimpers and Bear's gentle responses. Elsie struggled to process the morning's revelations. Scout was dead, Duchess was damaged, and the simple happiness of their puppy years felt like something from another lifetime. At the fire scene, now reduced to smoldering ruins, they found Scout's body where Dr. Hansen had said. The brave dog had died trying to return to his sister, his loyalty intact even in the face of overwhelming danger. Bear's reaction to seeing Scout's still form was heartbreaking. The massive dog approached his littermate with careful reverence, touching his nose to Scout's fur in a final goodbye. His grief was palpable, a reminder that dogs understand loss in ways that mirror human emotion. "We'll bury him on my property," Dr. Hansen said quietly, "under the old oak where he used to lie in the afternoons." Duchess remained huddled in the veterinary truck, her wild eyes tracking every movement but refusing direct contact with any human. The psychological damage was severe, possibly permanent. "What happens now?" Elsie asked, looking between Duchess's traumatized form and Bear's grieving posture. Dr. Hansen's expression was grim. "Duchess needs specialized rehabilitation if she can be rehabilitated at all. Some animals never recover from trauma this severe, and even if she does improve, she'll never be the dog she was before." The morning had shattered illusions Elsie hadn't realized she was carrying. She'd built a life around the belief that training and preparation could overcome any challenge, that the bonds Samuel had taught her to value would provide permanent stability. But loss was part of life, even for the most loyal and well-trained animals. Scout's death reminded her that courage didn't guarantee survival, while Duchess's psychological damage proved that some wounds went deeper than physical injury. Bear pressed against her legs, offering comfort while dealing with his own grief. The three littermates who had shared everything, puppyhood, training, separation, and partial reunion, were now reduced to two, with one of the survivors, damaged perhaps beyond repair, standing amid the ruins of Dr. Hansen's lifework, watching Duchess's wild terror and Bear's profound sadness. Elsie realized that her understanding of loyalty and loss had been naive. The real test wasn't whether bonds could survive separation, it was whether they could survive the kind of devastating loss that left survivors changed. Forever, the emergency radio in her truck crackled to life, calling her to another scene, another crisis. Professional duty demanded her attention, but part of her heart remained in that smoky clearing where Scout lay still and Duchess cowered, in terror from the humans who only wanted to help. The weather. Radio's urgent tone cut through the pre-dawn stillness of the Whitefish Range Station, its electronic voice delivering news that would change everything. Extreme fire weather warning in effect. Wind speeds 30 to 45 miles per hour with gusts to 60. Relative humidity dropping to single digits. Red flag conditions expected to persist through week's end. Elsie sat up in her narrow bunk, instantly alert despite having returned from Dr. Hansen's fire only 18 hours earlier. Bear lifted his massive head from his position on the floor, reading the tension in her movement and responding with the practiced alertness of a seasoned working dog. 6 months had passed since Scout's death and Duchess's rescue. 6 months of watching Bear carry the weight of loss while maintaining his professional responsibilities. The big dog had aged noticeably, his movements slightly less energetic, his dark eyes holding depths of sadness that reminded Elsie daily of what they'd both lost. Duchess had defied Dr. Hansen's pessimistic predictions, slowly emerging from the psychological wilderness where trauma had trapped her. The rehabilitation process had been painstaking. Weeks of patient work to rebuild trust, to convince a damaged mind that humans could again represent safety rather than threat. Now, almost recovered, she lived at the fire station as an unofficial therapy dog, helping stressed firefighters process the emotional toll of emergency work. But the approaching weather system promised challenges that would test everyone's capabilities. The forecasting equipment told a story of converging atmospheric conditions that created firefighters' worst nightmare. Hot, dry air masses driven by powerful winds across drought-stressed forests. Station Commander Peters called an all-hands meeting at 0600, his weathered face reflecting the gravity of the situation. 23-year veteran of wilderness firefighting, Peters had seen conditions like these before and understood their potential for devastation. "Folks, we're looking at a perfect storm scenario," he began, indicating the weather map spread across the briefing room table. High-pressure system moving in from the east, low pressure to the west, and a temperature differential that's going to create winds like we haven't seen in 5 years. Elsie studied the meteorological data, her training allowing her to read the subtle indicators that predicted fire behavior. The approaching system would turn the forests of northwestern Montana into a massive tinderbox, ready to explode at the slightest ignition source. "What's our deployment strategy?" asked Martinez, the station's most experienced crew leader. Peters pointed to areas on the topographical map where computer models predicted the highest risk. "Advanced reconnaissance teams will position in remote areas ahead of the main weather system. Early detection and rapid response, our best chance of preventing small fires from becoming major disasters." Bear moved closer to Elsie's chair, his protective instincts activated by the tension in the room. After 6 months of working with traumatized Duchess, he developed even greater sensitivity to emotional undercurrents, reading human stress levels with uncanny accuracy. "McKenna, you and Bear are assigned to Sector 7, Peters continued, indicating a remote area near the Canadian border. "It's rough country, but your combined capabilities make you our best option for that terrain." Sector 7 encompassed nearly 50 square miles of pristine wilderness, accessible only by helicopter or extended hiking through difficult mountain passes. The area contained some of Montana's most valuable old-growth forests, but its remoteness made it extremely dangerous for firefighting operations. "Communication protocols will be critical," Peters emphasized. "Weather conditions may interfere with radio contact for extended periods. Teams will need to make independent decisions based on field conditions." The briefing continued with equipment checks, supply inventories, and coordination details. But Elsie's attention kept drifting to Bear. The big dog's behavior had changed since Scout's death, more protective, more anxious about separation, more attuned to potential threats. His professional performance remained excellent, but she sensed the psychological toll of loss affecting his confidence. After the briefing, Elsie conducted her own assessment of their gear and supplies. The satellite phone, their primary communication link to base camp, received special attention. Recent budget cuts had reduced equipment redundancy, making each piece of technology critical for safety. Bear watched her preparations with the intense focus he'd always shown before difficult assignments. His intelligence allowed him to recognize the signs of major deployment, the specialized equipment, the careful planning, the subtle tension that indicated this mission would be different from routine patrols. "You ready for this, big guy?" Elsie asked, running her fingers through his thick coat. At 9 years old, Bear remained physically capable, but she'd noticed subtle changes, slightly slower recovery after long deployments, occasional stiffness in his hindquarters after difficult terrain. Bear's response was immediate and characteristic, a gentle head bump against her shoulder that conveyed both affection and readiness. Whatever challenges awaited them in Sector 7, they would face them together. Duchess appeared in the equipment bay, her rehabilitation having progressed to the point where she could move freely through the station. The female's recovery had been remarkable, but she remained changed by her trauma, more cautious, more sensitive to stress, less willing to engage with unfamiliar situations. The interaction between Bear and Duchess had evolved into something approaching their original sibling relationship, but with new dimensions created by shared loss and mutual support. Bear's protective instincts now extended to his sister, while Duchess provided emotional grounding that helped Bear process his own grief. "She's worried about you going out," observed Dr. Martinez, the station's consulting psychologist who worked with both human and canine stress management. "Dogs understand deployment patterns, and she associates your extended absences with danger." Elsie knelt beside Duchess, offering the gentle contact that had slowly rebuilt their bond. The beautiful sable coat had regained its luster, but the dog's eyes still held shadows of the terror she'd experienced. "Take care of the station while we're gone," Elsie whispered, a ritual that seemed to provide comfort to both dogs. Duchess pressed closer, her response conveying understanding and concern. The helicopter departure was scheduled for 1400 hours, allowing time for final weather updates and equipment verification. The aircraft would insert them at a remote landing zone, then return to base until extraction or emergency evacuation became necessary. Bear's experience with helicopter transport was extensive, but he always showed subtle anxiety during the loading process. The combination of noise, mechanical vibration, and enforced confinement triggered protective instincts that made him restless until they reached their destination. As departure time approached, the weather forecasts grew increasingly ominous. Wind speeds were exceeding predictions, and the relative humidity was dropping faster than computer models had anticipated. The approaching system was intensifying beyond normal parameters. "Conditions are deteriorating faster than expected," reported the meteorology technician. "We're looking at extreme fire behavior potential by tomorrow afternoon." Commander Peters faced a difficult decision. The advanced reconnaissance teams could still be deployed safely, but extraction might become impossible if conditions continued worsening. Teams inserted now might remain in the field for extended periods without support or evacuation options. "All teams have final abort authority," Peters announced. "If field conditions become untenable, extract immediately. No fire suppression objective is worth risking personnel." The helicopter lifted off at exactly 1400 hours, carrying Elsie and Bear toward some of Montana's most remote and beautiful wilderness. Below them, endless forests stretched toward distant mountain peaks, their green canopy hiding the complex ecosystem that would soon face its greatest test. Bear pressed against Elsie's side during the flight, his massive frame providing comfort and reassurance. The partnership that had sustained them through 5 years of emergency work felt stronger than ever, tempered by recent loss, but not broken by. The landing zone was a small meadow, surrounded by towering pines and steep rocky slopes. The helicopter touched down just long enough for them to unload equipment and supplies, then lifted off immediately. leaving them alone with the vast silence of the Montana wilderness. Bear's demeanor shifted immediately upon touchdown, his senses expanding to process the countless streams of information available in the wild environment. His nose worked constantly, reading air currents that carried messages about weather changes, animal movements, and the subtle chemical signatures that might indicate fire danger. Elsie established their base camp with practiced efficiency, setting up communication equipment and organizing supplies for quick access. The satellite phone showed strong signal strength, but she knew that could change rapidly as weather conditions deteriorated. As afternoon faded toward evening, the first signs of the approaching weather system became apparent. Wind speeds increased noticeably, and the air carried the dry electric feeling that preceded major atmospheric disturbances. Bear's anxiety levels rose with the changing conditions. His protective instincts, already heightened by recent loss, responded to environmental cues that suggested danger approaching. He positioned himself where he could monitor all approaches to their camp while maintaining visual contact with Elsie. The weather radio delivered updates that confirmed their worst fears. The approaching system was intensifying beyond all predictions, creating atmospheric conditions that would turn the entire region into a potential catastrophe zone. Extreme fire weather warning upgraded to critical, the metallic voice announced. All personnel in remote areas should prepare for immediate evacuation procedures. But even as the warning crackled through the speaker, Elsie knew that evacuation might already be impossible. The helicopter wouldn't fly in the wind conditions that were rapidly developing, and hiking out through 50 miles of mountain terrain would take days, time they might not have if fires began erupting across the region. Bear pressed closer as darkness fell, his steady presence providing the emotional anchor that had sustained her through countless challenges. Tomorrow would test everything Samuel had taught them about partnership, loyalty, and survival. In the distance, lightning flickered against the horizon, not the gentle storms of summer, but the dry electrical activity that could ignite 1,000 fires with a single strike. The wilderness around them held its breath, waiting for the spark that would transform beauty into devastation. The explosion came without warning at 0347 hours, a lightning strike so close that the thunder and flash occurred simultaneously, jolting Elsie from restless sleep into immediate crisis mode. Bear was already on his feet, his massive frame silhouetted against the orange glow that had appeared on the eastern ridge. A glow that meant only one thing: fire, Elsie whispered, reaching for the satellite phone even as she pulled on her boots. The communication device showed no signal bars, its screen displaying the dreaded no service message that meant they were completely isolated. Within minutes, the wind had transformed the single ignition point into something monstrous. Flames raced up the eastern slope with supernatural speed, driven by gusts that exceeded 60 miles per hour, and fed by vegetation so dry it might as well have been soaked in gasoline. Bear's behavior shifted into full alarm mode, his protective instincts recognizing danger that transcended their normal firefighting experience. This wasn't a controlled suppression operation. This was survival, pure and simple. Elsie grabbed her emergency gear and began the evacuation procedure they'd drilled countless times but never hoped to use. The predetermined escape route led west through a narrow canyon that should provide protection from the main fire front. But wind patterns were already creating unpredictable fire behavior that made all standard tactics questionable. "Come on." "Bear," she called, shouldering her pack and checking the GPS coordinates one final time. The satellite phone remained dead, its electronics apparently damaged by the lightning strike that had started this nightmare. They moved quickly through the pre-dawn darkness, Bear ranging ahead to scout the trail while staying close enough to maintain visual contact. His night vision and superior hearing provided critical intelligence about changing conditions that Elsie's human senses couldn't detect. The fire's roar grew louder behind them, a sound like freight trains and hurricane winds combined into something that seemed to shake the earth itself. The eastern sky had turned the color of molten copper, and ash began falling like snow despite their distance from the main burn area. After 2 hours of hard hiking, they reached what should have been their primary safety zone, a rocky outcrop beside a seasonal creek that typically provided natural fire breaks. Instead, they found flames already crowning through the trees on the opposite slope, cutting off their planned escape route. "We're boxed in," Elsie realized, studying the fire behavior through her binoculars. The wind patterns had created a perfect storm scenario, with flames racing along multiple fronts simultaneously. Every direction showed some level of fire activity, and the safe zones marked on their maps were either already burning or threatened by rapidly advancing fire fronts. Bear pressed close to her side, his intelligent eyes reflecting the orange glow that now surrounded their position on 3 sides. His anxiety was palpable, but he remained focused and responsive, waiting for direction from the human partner he trusted absolutely. The satellite phone's continued silence meant no rescue was coming. Helicopter evacuation was impossible in current wind conditions, and ground crews couldn't reach their remote location through the wall of flames that now separated them from civilization. Elsie forced herself to think clearly, despite the panic that threatened to overwhelm her judgment. Samuel's voice seemed to echo from the training journal she'd memorized. In crisis situations, systematic thinking saves lives while emotional reactions kill. Assess, plan, execute, always in that order. Assessment revealed their situation was desperate but not hopeless. The rocky outcrop provided some protection from radiant heat, and the seasonal creek offered a potential source of water for cooling and protection. Their supplies included emergency fire shelters, last resort protection that might allow them to survive a firefront passage, but the behavior of this fire exceeded anything she'd experienced. Normal suppression tactics were meaningless against flames that jumped quarter-mile gaps and created their own weather patterns. This was the kind of disaster that made headlines and ended careers, or lives. Bear's distress increased as the fire closed around their position. The massive dog had faced dangerous situations throughout his career, but his instincts recognized something different about this threat. His protective behavior intensified, positioning himself between Elsie and every potential danger point. "We need to find better shelter," Elsie decided, scanning the terrain for options that might improve their survival odds. A shallow cave or deep ravine might provide protection from the radiant heat and toxic gases that killed more firefighters than direct flame contact. But movement was becoming increasingly dangerous. The fire had created its own weather system, with winds shifting direction unpredictably and spot fires erupting miles ahead of the main front. What looked like a safe route could become a death trap within minutes. As full daylight revealed the scope of the disaster, Elsie realized they were witnessing one of those rare fire events that occurred perhaps once in a generation. A perfect alignment of weather, fuel conditions and topography that created unstoppable devastation. Bear's whining became more insistent, his communication taking on the urgent tone he used when detecting immediate threats. His superior senses were processing information that human perception couldn't access. And his message was clear. Their current position was about to become untenable. The decision to move came just as the western fire front crested the ridge above their position, showering them with burning embers the size of golf balls. The rocky shelter was about to become a death trap, surrounded by flames on all sides, with no escape route visible. The moment of final decision arrived with crystalline clarity that transcended fear or doubt. Bear stood beside Elsie at the edge of their makeshift shelter, both of them surrounded by walls of flame that left only one option, an option that would test the deepest bonds Samuel had ever taught them about loyalty and sacrifice. "Bear," Elsie said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them, "I need you to go get help." The massive German shepherd's dark eyes met hers with understanding that went beyond training or instinct. This wasn't a routine command or a training exercise. This was the ultimate test of their partnership. asking him to abandon his primary protective duty to serve a greater purpose. Bear's dog tags caught the orange firelight as he turned his great head toward the advancing flames. Samuel's military service number was etched into the metal, a reminder of generational duty and sacrifice that connected past and present in this moment of crisis. Elsie knelt beside her partner, running her hands through his thick coat one final time, memorizing the texture and warmth that had comforted her through countless difficulties. 30 miles to base camp, she whispered, indicating the direction he needed to travel. Through the burn zone, through the chaos. You can do this, Bear whined softly, his entire body trembling with conflict between protective instincts and trained obedience. Every fiber of his nature demanded that he stay with Elsie, that he face whatever came together as they always had. But the intelligent animal also understood the mathematics of survival. If he stayed, they would both die in this rocky trap. If he left, there was a chance, however slim, that rescue might reach her in time. Go, Elsie commanded, using the firm tone that had directed thousands of training exercises over 5 years of partnership. Go now. Bear turned away, then looked back one final time. His expression held all the emotion that 9 years of shared life could contain. Love, loyalty, fear, and determination mixed into something that transcended simple animal intelligence. Then he was gone, disappearing into the smoke and flame like a ghost made of shadow and determination. The journey that followed tested every survival skill Samuel had ever taught, every lesson learned through years of training in Montana's wilderness. Bear moved through a landscape transformed into something from nightmare, trees exploding into torches, ground that burned beneath his paws, air so hot it seared his lungs with every breath. His navigation was entirely instinctual now, guided by internal compass points that drew him toward distant safety. The 30-mile route to base camp lay across terrain that was actively burning, through creek beds filled with superheated steam, over ridges where the very rocks glowed with radiant heat. Twice he was forced to shelter in water, submerging himself completely as fire fronts passed overhead with hurricane-force winds that bent massive trees like grass. His thick coat, soaked and singed, provided just enough protection to survive the radiant heat that would have killed smaller animals instantly. The worst moment came at mile 15, where a crown fire had created a solid wall of flame across his path. For precious minutes, Bear circled the barrier, seeking passage through an obstacle that appeared absolutely impassable. Then his nose caught a scent that galvanized every muscle in his powerful frame, the familiar smell of human firefighters, carried on wind currents from somewhere beyond the flames. Rescue teams were already deployed, already fighting this monster. But they were on the wrong side of an inferno that seemed designed to prevent any human approach. Bear's decision was instantaneous and desperate. He charged directly through the flame wall, his massive body absorbing punishment that would have stopped any creature driven by mere survival instinct. But this was beyond survival. This was the kind of loyalty that Samuel had recognized in the military dogs who died saving their human partners. The final 15 miles passed in a blur of pain, exhaustion, and single-minded determination. Bear's paws were burned, his coat singed to the skin in places, his eyes streaming from smoke exposure that would have blinded a lesser animal. But he kept moving, driven by something deeper than training or instinct. Elsie's life depended on his success, and that simple fact overrode every physical limitation, every obstacle, every reason why this journey should have been impossible. Base camp appeared through the smoke like a mirage, helicopters grounded by dangerous winds, fire crews staging equipment for operations that seemed hopeless, commanders studying maps that showed only devastating red zones where fires raged unchecked. Bear's arrival caused immediate commotion. The massive dog collapsed at the feet of Commander Peters, his burned paws leaving bloody tracks on the pavement, his labored breathing barely sufficient to sustain consciousness. But his message was clear to everyone who understood working dog communication. Bear had come from the direction of Sector 7, had traveled through 30 miles of active fire zone, and was desperately trying to communicate something about his missing partner. McKenna, Peters breathed, understanding immediately. He's trying to tell us about McKenna. Bear summoned his last reserves of strength, lifting his great head to lock eyes with the commander. In that gaze, Peters read everything he needed to know: location, urgency, and the absolute certainty that a rescue attempt had to begin immediately, regardless of conditions. The helicopter crew was already moving toward their aircraft as Bear finally allowed exhaustion to claim him. His mission completed, and his loyalty proven beyond any possible doubt. 6 weeks after the rescue, Elsie sat in the hospital's rehabilitation unit with Bear lying beside her chair, both of them still bearing the visible marks of their ordeal. Her hands, bandaged from burns and smoke inhalation, rested gently on Bear's healing coat, where veterinarians had treated second-degree burns from his impossible journey through 30 miles of active wildfire. The story had captured national attention. The wilderness firefighter trapped by the largest wildfire in Montana's recorded history, and the German shepherd whose loyalty had guided rescuers through conditions that should have made survival impossible. News crews had wanted interviews, magazine writers had requested exclusives, and Hollywood producers had called about film rights, but Elsie declined them all. This wasn't a story for entertainment. It was a testament to bonds that couldn't be easily explained or commercialized. Dr. Martinez approached with his morning assessment, his expression showing the satisfaction of a medical professional whose patient had exceeded all recovery expectations. "Your lung function tests are back to normal range," he reported, "and Bear's paw pads have healed remarkably well. You're both cleared for discharge." Through the window, autumn painted the hospital grounds in shades of gold and amber that reminded Elsie of that October day 26 years ago when she'd first found 3 abandoned puppies behind a crumbling barn. The circular nature of their story felt almost mystical. Rescued dogs becoming rescuers. Saved lives enabling the saving of other lives. Captain Walsh appeared in the doorway, her weathered face showing the mixture of professional respect and personal affection that had developed during Elsie's recovery. "There's someone here to see you," she announced, stepping aside to reveal Commander Peters carrying a familiar wooden box. Samuel's bronze star caught the afternoon light as Peters placed the box on Elsie's bedside table. The medal had been recovered from the family's storage unit, Claire's decision to finally pass it on to her daughter, recognizing that Elsie had earned the right to carry her grandfather's legacy forward. "The Forest Service has approved the K9 wilderness program you proposed," Peters announced. "Full funding for training facilities, specialized equipment, and personnel. You'll head the program as soon as you're ready to return to duty." The new program would train human-dog teams for the kind of extreme wilderness work that had saved Elsie's life. Bear would become the foundation breeding male, his offspring inheriting both his exceptional abilities and his proven loyalty. The genetic line that had begun with Samuel's careful selection would continue, serving future generations of firefighters and rescue personnel. More importantly, Duchess had graduated from her therapy work to become the program's primary training assistant. Her intuitive understanding of trauma and recovery, forged through her own devastating experiences, made her uniquely qualified to help both humans and dogs process the psychological challenges of emergency work. "She's been waiting for you," Dr. Martinez said as they prepared for discharge. "Duchess has been at the station every day since you've been hospitalized, watching the road for your return." The reunion took place in the station's equipment bay, where Duchess waited with the patient dignity that had always characterized her nature. Her beautiful sable coat had regained its full luster, and her eyes no longer held the shadows of trauma that had marked her recovery from the clinic fire. Bear's interaction with his sister revealed the depth of their continuing bond. Despite his own injuries and exhaustion, his first priority was ensuring Duchess understood he had returned safely. Their communication transcended human understanding, a complex exchange of scents, sounds, and subtle body language that conveyed information about experiences, emotions, and intentions. Claire arrived for the homecoming with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the full significance of what her daughter and Bear had accomplished. The partnership she had once worried was unhealthily intense had proven to be something extraordinary, a bond strong, enough to overcome impossible obstacles and save lives under the most extreme conditions. Your grandfather would be so proud, Claire whispered, embracing Elsie gently to avoid aggravating, still healing injuries. The wooden box containing Samuel's bronze star sat on the station's memorial shelf, joining other artifacts that honored firefighters and working dogs who had given their lives in service. But unlike the other memorials, this one represented continuity rather than ending, a legacy passed from one generation to the next. From one partnership to another, Elsie opened Samuel's training journal to the final entry he'd written 20 years earlier. "Trust the bond. It will sustain them both when I cannot." His prophecy had proven accurate in ways he could never have imagined, guiding them through separation, loss, trauma, and finally, the ultimate test of loyalty and survival. The new K-9 program's first class would begin training in the spring, using facilities built with funding secured through Elsie's newfound influence as a recognized expert in human-animal partnerships. Young firefighters would learn the same lessons Samuel had taught decades earlier, that the bonds between species, properly nurtured, could create capabilities that exceeded the sum of their parts. Bear's offspring would carry forward the genetic heritage of intelligence, loyalty, and courage that had saved lives during the war, protected children during trauma, and guided rescuers through impossible conditions. Each puppy would represent hope, the continuation of something precious in a world that often seemed to value convenience over commitment. As sunset painted the Montana sky in shades of rose and gold, Elsie sat on the station's porch with Bear and Duchess flanking her chair. The view encompassed the wilderness they protected, the community they served, and the future they were helping to build, one partnership, one rescue, one act of loyalty at a time. The circle that had begun with a 7-year-old girl's compassion for 3 abandoned puppies was complete, but it was also beginning again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new trainees, and new opportunities to prove that the smallest acts of kindness could indeed echo through decades, creating legacies that transcended individual lives. Bear's great head rested against her shoulder in their familiar comfort position, while Duchess maintained her dignified watch over their peaceful kingdom. 3 dogs had become 2, but the bonds that connected them to past and future remained unbroken, eternal testament to love that asks nothing in return but the chance to serve.